Welcome to another Orbiter 2010 Fly With Me video. In this video, I'm going to go from Phobos to Deimos, and this was actually requested by somebody who saw one of my previous videos. They asked me to make a video going from Phobos to Deimos, so I thought it'd make for a good Fly With Me video. This scenario is actually the landed at Olympus scenario that comes with the XR2 installation by default. What I did was just use the scenario editor to move the XR2 from Olympus on Mars over here to Phobos. That way I could do this flight from Phobos to Deimos without having to first spend all the time to get up off of Mars and over to Phobos. So let's go about solving this problem. How do we get from the moon of Phobos to the moon of Deimos? In my opinion, this isn't all that different from going from one space station to another. The moons of Mars are quite small, so in some sense we're basically just going to undock from Phobos, if you want to think about it that way, and then rendezvous with Deimos. And it's not even that hard to do because the orbital planes aren't very far off. But enough talk, let's just get into it. First thing I'm going to do is just hover up off of Phobos to put some distance between me and the moon. And the reason I want to do that is so that when I do my main engine burn to take me over to Deimos, I don't want to have any potential issue of having that main engine burn try to send me, through Phobos. Suppose the main engine burn wants me to go down, so to speak, then I don't want to have to go down through Phobos, because obviously that wouldn't work. So I need to get up off of Phobos and just get some distance away from it. So the hover doors are already open, radiator is already extended, so we'll just apply a little bit of hover engine here.
Wheels up.
And we'll go ahead and turn the APU on to bring up the landing gear.
Gear up.
Take a look at the external camera. We can see ourselves hovering up off of
Gear up and locked.
Phobos. It's pretty cool. And we should see Mars coming up over the horizon here in a moment. It's over there somewhere, unless it's on the other side. I'll take a look back in a moment. So, turn the APU off. That's plenty of hover for now. There's Mars. Okay, so now that I've got some distance between my vessel and Phobos, and I'm getting up off of Phobos and continuing to put some distance at a rate of 77 meters a second, so I can go ahead and start my plan for getting over to Deimos. Bring up TransX, and in the view setup here, first thing we're going to do is, with the planets moons already selected, I can just press ++, and that'll select Deimos. The other option, of course, is Phobos and then escape. We want Deimos. And then I'll press VW to get over to maneuver, and I have to turn maneuver mode on, because if I don't, I can't go through the variables. So I turn maneuver mode on, and I'm going to come over here to the prograde variable. And what we're looking at here is, that's Mars here in the center, and this green line, of course, is myself. It's my vessel, and it also basically represents Phobos. And then this blue circle is the orbit of Deimos around Mars. So if my orbit is here, and Deimos's orbit is out there, then I need to raise my orbit so that it intersects with or matches Deimos. So I'm going to add a little bit of prograde, and I can see that's quite sensitive, so I'm going to change the adjustment to medium and add a few more clicks and go down to a fine adjustment, and we'll go with that. That basically, that dashed yellow line shows that my orbit is now extended out to the orbit of Deimos if I were to go with this burn. But I'm separated in time, or in space. Deimos is currently here, it's the long blue line, and according to Transx, if I were to do this burn right now, that would send me, which I'm here, this green line, it would send me out here, and I would end up at Deimos' orbit here, while Deimos would actually be over here. So I need to change the time of the burn so that when I get out to the orbit of Deimos, then Deimos and myself are in the same place. So I do that by going to the date, and this is very, very, very sensitive. So I need to go down to a, let's go with an alter setting. And I need to bump the time forward until it basically intersects with this dashed yellow line and this dashed yellow line. That means that my position and the position of Deimos are going to be at the same place. So I'm just going to continue to add some time until they get close together. About like that. You can see the closest approach coming down. Go down to a hyper setting now. And I'm going to just continue to add time until the closest approach won't go any lower. I can see it starting to go up now. So if I kick it back a little bit, looks like the closest approach is right there. So now I want to change the plane. Go down to a fine setting. I can see by this white line that I would be a little bit out of plane with Deimos. So if I use plus or minus to figure out which direction brings my closest approach down, it's going to be minus. Actually, it might have been plus. Nope, I had it right the first time, it's minus. So I just pressed minus, and that swung the plane around, and now it's getting closer. Go down to a finer setting, and just keep hitting minus minus until the closest approach won't get any lower. Go to a finer setting yet. And that's the lowest. It's now starting to go up. So now I can just go back to prograde, and I can start to just, dial this in and get even more accurate with the closest approach. So I'll press adjustment to go down to a super adjustment, and press plus plus, which I can go back to fine. And I just keep, working these variables back and forth until I get the best closest approach. So it looks like that goes down to about 123, and then it goes the other direction. So that's all I'm going to get right there at the moment. Let me try a little bit of plane change one more time. And it looks like about 111. Let's do a little bit of a date adjustment one more time. It's all the way at the lowest setting already. So I can see that's got the closest approach all the way down to 41 kilometers right there. So one more time we'll work with prograde down to an ultra setting. And now that that's about as low as it's going to get, I know we should be able to get this even a little closer yet with just using a little bit of outward. So that's the final variable. Basically what outward does is it adds a little bit of extra time to the amount of it adds a little bit of distance, I guess you could say, to the orbital path. So, and by adding a little bit of distance, it adds time. It looks like we've got our closest approach down to about 28 kilometers, and that's really close. So we'll go with that. And then we'll plan on doing a mid-course correction when we get to about halfway out. So let's press VW to get over to view target. And we've already got rotation turned on, so we'll go ahead and warp time ahead until we get closer to the time to burn. And I do want to just briefly mention that I need to pay attention to this distance off of Phobos. If I'm plenty far away. Let me find Phobos, where'd it go? It's back here somewhere. There it is. I'm plenty far away, but if I only had my meters per second at, say, 10 or something like that when I lifted off, then it would be possible that I could actually start to settle back down to Phobos. That's not going to happen here, but just to mention that. So when you start accelerating time, you want to make sure you're not settling back down onto Phobos, because you'll crash into it. So let's go ahead and resume the time acceleration. We're coming up on the burn here in 200 seconds, so let's get ourselves rotated to the correct orientation. Okay, now I'll go ahead and warp time ahead to get rid of this last little bit of time. Okay, we're coming up on the burn in 10 seconds. 3, 2, 1, and burning. This is a relatively short burn. Start reducing the main engines. And that green X is drifting off now,
Translation.
so translate over to get it closer to center. Okay, now we'll get the rest of this with translation. Okay, we've got the delta V down to 0.00 plus a few decimal points. So that's good enough. We'll go to VW a couple times and turn off maneuver mode. And after the burn, it shows that our closest approach is now 40 kilometers. And the reason that changes from, what it was when we set this up to this is a couple of things. Number one, it's due to the inaccuracy of doing the burn manually. And then it's also due to the fact that we set up the maneuver 11,000 seconds ago. If I really wanted to be closer with this, then I would probably want to refine that maneuver when I was at about 1,000 seconds away, but it really doesn't matter. So let's go ahead and take a look at the external camera to see where we're at and what's going on. Kind of spin around, see if we can find our planet. There's Mars. And I don't know if I can, there's Phobos. Okay, so all we really need to do at this point, let me switch over to rotation for a moment.
Rotation.
And just kill rotation. And let's go ahead and fast forward time until we're at about halfway. Okay, we'll say that's halfway. This is pretty good just how it is. I could go ahead and just go all the way out to Phobos if I wanted. But let's go ahead and do a little bit of a mid-course correction here. Turn maneuver mode on. Go through the variables. Most likely the best variable to work with here is going to be outward. So we'll start with that. And again, the reason outward is probably the better variable is just due to the fact that it's going to add, it'll either add or subtract a little bit of time between where we currently are and where we need to be just by changing our inward and outward parameter. So adding plus makes it worse, so we'll go minus. And I'm not necessarily trying to get down to 0. I just want to get closer. So I can see that that's got me 10 kilometers closer. Let's just see if we can get anything out of the plane change. So I can see by adding a little bit of plane change, it's getting me another 8 or so kilometers there. And after changing the plane, sometimes it'll help to go back to outward and do a little bit more with that. So that's got us down to less than 10 kilometers. That is absolutely good enough, more than good enough, so let's go with that. Press VW to bring the target view back up, and even though this says that we needed to do the burn 110 seconds ago, we can just go ahead and do it now. The difference in time doesn't make a lot of difference just due to the fact that this is a mid-course correction. So get the green X lined up. Okay, now this is an extremely small burn, less than 5 delta V, so we'll just do one touch of main engine.
Translation.
And we'll get this last tiny bit with translation. Okay, we have delta V at 0.00, so we'll go with that. Change VW over to maneuver. Turn maneuver mode off. And their closest approach is 10 kilometers. Okay, let's do a couple things here before we move in the rest of the way. Let's start an external MFD so that we can bring up orbit. And what I want to do here is reference Deimos. And I'll change the projection to ship. And I want to, instead of having planocentric, I want to have the PEA APA. This does a couple things for me. Number one, it gives me this altitude readout, so I can have a good indicator of how far away I am from Deimos. This shows that I'm 6,000 kilometers away. But this also will also let me reference Deimos on the HUD by pressing HUD, and by having orbit Deimos on the HUD, I can now manually rotate so that I'm facing Deimos, and by doing that, that will let me see it in the forward view as I'm approaching it. Now I can't use the prograde retrograde autopilots because those will orient my vessel according to the strongest gravitational source, which is Mars, and I don't want to orient prograde to Mars. I want to orient prograde to Deimos, so I have to do it manually. Switch over to rotation.
Rotation.
And let's rotate heads up as compared to Deimos. And now if I press Control H to shut off the HUD, and if I press F9, I can see Deimos here. But as I get in closer, it'll become much larger in the forward view. So let me kill rotation, and now let's move forward. We've still got 6,500 kilometers to go. See Deimos there starting to get in larger view. Okay, we are close enough now that we need to start thinking about what we're going to do now that we are basically here. We're done with Transx. We don't need this one anymore. There are a couple ways, several different ways that we can get into orbit here around Mars. Note that we're not going to get into orbit around Deimos. It's just simply too small. It doesn't have enough of a gravitational pull. So we're just going to get up next to it, but our actual orbit is going to be an orbit around Mars. What I like to use, and again there are various options, but I find Attitude MFD works well for this. So I can press mod a couple times to bring up target relative, and then I can target Deimos. This is really convenient because it shows me my 3 directions of movement relative to Deimos. By zeroing out these 3 directions of movement, it basically puts me in lockstep with Deimos. I don't want to do that quite yet because I'm still a little ways out, but that's going to be the plan here eventually. Let me go ahead and start the APU and open the retro doors, because we'll use those eventually.
APU offline.
And what I can do here, you can see that my forward aft is plus 448 meters a second, and that my lateral is showing plus 124, and my vertical is showing plus 30. What I can do to zero these out is change my orientation. I can rotate so that all this vertical and lateral movement becomes part of the forward movement. And I'll show you what I mean. Let me rotate, I believe it would be a little bit of downward. Yeah. If I rotate this way a little bit, you can see the vertical is getting closer to 0. And I actually want to get that all the way as close to 0 as I can. It won't hold at exactly 0, but I can get it really close. We'll go with that. Now, by using a little bit of yaw, that'd be the 1 and 3 rotations, I can zero out the lateral. And what this is actually doing, if you don't understand, by yawing and pitching, I'm actually transferring the movement from vertical and lateral to forward aft. You'll notice as the lateral gets closer to 0, forward aft is actually going up. We've almost got this yawed around to 0. Go back a little bit. That's pretty close right there. And again, it won't hold at exactly 0, but it'll be really close. And our altitude is now showing 198. So let me press Control H to bring this back up. Switch over to the surface mode, and this is convenient because this shows me my distance above the surface, which won't necessarily be exactly the same as the distance readout here in the Attitude MFD. And I believe the reason for the discrepancy, I think the distance readout here is showing the distance between me and the center of Deimos, whereas this readout is showing me the distance between me and the surface of Deimos, and this is actually more important at the moment. So what I can do, or what I need to do, when my distance gets down to about 50 kilometers, I'm going to start using the retrograde, or rather the retro engines, to eliminate this velocity. So let's go ahead and press T to forward time until we get to about 50,000 meters, which would be 50 kilometers. Okay, so we're coming up on 50 kilometers. Just want to check my vertical and lateral one more time. Try to get those closer to 0. And that's really close. So now we'll use the retro engines to start eliminating this forward velocity. And while I'm doing that, something else I'll show over here. Let me reference Mars now. And we'll target Deimos. You'll notice what's happening. This green elliptical circle is our orbit. And as we're eliminating the velocity between us and Deimos, you'll notice our orbit is becoming more aligned with the orbit of Deimos, and by the time we're at the end of this burn, our orbit will match Deimos' orbit exactly. If you're approaching Deimos too quickly, you might actually have to do this burn in the opposite direction. You would rotate around until this showed as a negative number, and then you could use the main engines instead of the retro engines. But I started the burn early enough that the retro engines will be powerful enough to eliminate all the velocity for us before we, crash into Deimos. You can see over here on orbit MFD, our orbit is getting more aligned with the orbit of Deimos. As we get closer to the end of the burn, I'll slowly back off the retro here. Almost at the end of the burn. Okay, let's just a little more retro for a moment.
Translation.
And let's see what we can do about getting the last little bit of this with translation. This is certainly good enough. These won't hold at exactly 0 anyway, but we can get them zeroed out for a second or two anyway. Okay, so there we have it. All of our directions of movement are now 0 relative to Deimos. So if you understand then what's happening, we are basically still, next to Deimos. We're orbiting Mars, but we are, as far as Deimos is concerned, we're not going anywhere. We're not getting closer to it, we're not getting farther away from it, and we're not going up or down or left or right. So we basically are still. But again, this will slip gradually because of gravitation, because of the gravity of Mars and everything. So let's go ahead and close out orbit MFD. I don't think we really need that anymore. Let's say we do want to go ahead and land on Deimos. Now that we're out here, we might as well, get in closer. But we could turn on our XR2 scientific cameras, take some pictures and whatever else. But let's go ahead and land. It's a pretty simple process, actually.
Rotation.
All we really need to do is just rotate over so that we're facing Deimos. So that we're pointed exactly at Deimos, and just pick a landing spot. Doesn't really matter since there's no base. There's really no way to pick a target. Before I actually touch down on Deimos, there are a couple things I want to mention. Orbiter only supports spherical objects for moons. And the issue that we have with Deimos, and this also applies to Phobos, is that the mesh, which is the graphics, hopefully this isn't too technical, and honestly I don't really understand all the technical ins and outs myself, but basically the graphic of Deimos is not a sphere. I mean, you can tell just by looking at it. It's lumpy. It's shaped more like a potato or something than a sphere. So let's say that a sphere would be, like this, more around the center. That means all this stuff out here on the edge is just graphics. So what can happen, and what will happen, is when you land on Deimos and you land on Phobos, it actually appears as though you're sinking inside of it, because this part of the graphics, or maybe this part, or maybe this part over here, is outside of that sphere. So you end up, it looks like you're actually sinking through it, and you're not really. You're just going through the graphic. Or it also can happen that the sphere actually extends out beyond the edge of the graphic. So like maybe right here where this divots in a little bit, let's say that the sphere of Deimos is defined as coming out here like that, then you would actually land and stop, and it would appear as though you're hovering in space, because the graphic, the mesh, doesn't go out that far. So that's just something to note. As we land here, it will probably appear as though we're sinking through the moon, but we're not. So now that I'm facing Deimos, I just want to apply a little bit of main engine. And we'll go down to, say, 30 meters a second. Should be good enough. We'll go with that. And now what I want to do is rotate so that the belly of the vessel is, let's say this is Deimos. I want to land like that. I don't want to land like that, obviously. So we'll rotate up. And we can just take a look to see, so you can understand. Now we're heading down, and if we use a little bit of time acceleration, you can understand easier what's going on here. See the belly of the vessel's on the bottom, and we're now descending towards Deimos. So let me use a little bit of time acceleration to get closer. Get down to maybe 5 kilometers. Okay, we'll go with that for a moment. Now let's turn on the APU and extend the landing gear.
Gear down.
Got the hover doors already open.
Gear down and locked.
And one final comment before I try to touch down. The gravity of Deimos, Phobos, and these small moons is so slight that it's pretty hard to settle the vessel onto the surface. What always happens to me, at least, is when I touch down, it says wheels down, and then immediately wheels up. And then when you try to settle down again, it says wheels down, wheels up, wheels down, wheels up. I think what's happening, at least in my mind, it seems like it's almost like the air pressure of the tires, or maybe the shocks of the XR2 are touching down and then immediately bouncing you back off a little bit. So it takes a while to settle down.
5,000.
Eventually you will settle. What I can also do, I can use the descent autopilot to go ahead and just land for me. And I can also use the attitude hold to keep the vessel level.
$4,000.
Just going to warp time ahead a little bit. Once we get a little lower,
3,000.
turn on the auto land.
2,000. You are cleared to land.
Okay, we'll go with that. We'll turn on the descent hold and turn on auto land. I'm going to go ahead and warp time ahead a little bit.
1,900, 800, 700, 600, 500, 400, 300.
Okay, we'll go down to real time. Take a look at the external camera. And here in a moment, you'll probably start to
200.
see, unless we just happen to pick a really good spot, if we just got lucky, and we have one of the spots where the mesh and the sphere are lined up, then otherwise
100.
you'll see our vessel start to sink into
75.
the surface here in a moment.
50.
Got
40.
the auto land kicking in.
30. 20. 15. 10. 8. 6. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. Wheels up.
See, we got that wheels down, wheels up. It looks like this spot is one of the spots where the sphere of Deimos
Wheels up.
extends above the mesh. So it looks like we're landing in midair, and that's again just because the graphic doesn't come all the way up here. So now I'm going to try to get the vessel to settle onto the surface. This is a pain in the neck. What I've got to do is I've got to keep the vessel level with the horizon, and then I've got to use a little bit of linear translation to sort of force it down.
Translation.
So I use a little bit of 8 here. You can see that's got the meters per second now down in the negative.
2. 1. Wheels up.
And immediately 8.
Wheels up.
And immediately 8.
Wheels down. Wheels up. 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 1. Wheels up. Wheels up. 1. Wheels up. Wheels up.
I'm going to check my
Rotation.
rotation because I'm getting a little off. I need to be level.
Translation. 1. Wheels up.
Oh, what an annoyance. Maybe if I use the brakes.
Wheels up. Wheels up. Wheels stop.
Finally. That's harder than landing on the moon. So we finally got wheel stop, and again here we are landed on Deimos, but it's unfortunate that the graphic does this thing. There are a couple spots on each of these moons where the graphic and the spherical definition lines up, so it appears that you're actually on the surface. In fact, when I set up this scenario and lifted off of Phobos, I used the scenario editor to put the XR2 in one of those spots on Phobos. I don't know if I showed it when I lifted off, but I moved the XR2 so that it appeared as though it was actually sitting on the surface. So there you have it. Phobos to Deimos using Transx. Hopefully you were able to get something out of this video. If you liked it, leave a comment down below. The hover doors are already open, radiator is already extended, so we'll just apply a little bit of hover engine here.
Wheels up.
And we'll go ahead and turn the APU on to bring up the landing gear.
Gear up.
Take a look at the external camera. We can see ourselves hovering up off of
Gear up and locked.
Phobos. It's pretty cool. And we should see Mars coming up over the horizon here in a moment. It's over there somewhere, unless it's on the other side. Now, take a look back in a moment. So, turn the APU off. That's plenty of hover for now. There's Mars. Okay, so now that I've got some distance between my vessel and Phobos, and I'm getting up from one space station to another, the moons of Mars are quite small. So in some sense, we're basically just going to undock from Phobos, if you want to think about it that way, and then rendezvous with Deimos. And it's not even that hard to do because the orbital planes aren't very far off. But enough talk, let's just get into it. First thing I'm going to do is just hover up off of Phobos to put some distance between me and the moon. And the reason I want to do that is so that when I do my main engine burn to take me over to Deimos, I don't want to have any potential issue of having that main engine burn try to send me, through Phobos. Suppose the main engine burn wants me to go down, so to speak, then I don't want to have to go down through Phobos, because obviously that wouldn't work. So I need to get up off of Phobos and just get some distance away from it. So a little bit of prograde, and I can see that's quite sensitive, so I'm going to change the adjustment to medium and add a few more clicks and go down to a fine adjustment, and we'll go with that. That basically, that dashed yellow line shows that my orbit is now extended out to the orbit of Deimos if I were to go with this burn. But I'm separated in time, or in space. Deimos is currently here, it's the long blue line, and according to Transx, if I were to do this burn right now, that would send me, which I'm here, this green line, it would send me out here, and I would end up at Deimos's orbit here, while Deimos would actually be over here. So I need to change the time of the burn so that when I get out to the orbit of Deimos, then Deimos and myself are in the same place. So I do that by going to the date, and this is very, very, very sensitive. So I need to go down to a, let's go with an ultra. Welcome to another Orbiter 2010 Fly With Me video. In this video, I'm going to go from Phobos to Deimos, and this was actually requested by somebody who saw one of my previous videos. They asked me to make a video going from Phobos to Deimos, so I thought it'd make for a good Fly With Me video. This scenario is actually the landed at Olympus scenario that comes with the XR2 installation by default. what I did was just use the scenario editor to move the XR2 from Olympus on Mars over here to Phobos. That way I could do this flight from Phobos to Deimos without having to first spend all the time to get up off of Mars and over to Phobos. So let's go about solving this problem. How do we get from the moon of Phobos to the moon of Deimos? In my opinion, this isn't all that different from going Phobos and continuing to put some distance at a rate of 77 meters a second. So I can go ahead and start my plan for getting over to Deimos. Bring up TransX, and in the view setup here, first thing we're going to do is, with the planet's moons already selected, I can just press ++, and that'll select Deimos. The other option, of course, is Phobos and then escape. We want Deimos. Then I'll press VW to get over to maneuver, and I have to turn maneuver mode on, because if I don't, I can't go through the variables. So I turn maneuver mode on, and I'm going to come over here to the prograde variable. And what we're looking at here is, that's Mars here in the center. And this green line, of course, is myself. It's my vessel. And it also basically represents Phobos. And then this blue circle is the orbit of Deimos around Mars. So if my orbit is here, and Deimos's orbit is out there, then I need to raise my orbit so that it intersects with or matches Deimos. So I'm going to add